With the first task here is talk about this online lecture, Teaching of Sport. And you can see we're going to cover a couple things: principles of teaching sport, some technical and tactical skills, and then we'll get into a plan for teaching. That's where the workshops are involved. The principles of teaching sport, you can see, is a breakdown here. But we're going to start out with some definitions. Skill in sport is being able to execute the techniques required at the right time and place. So a skill is then a proficient use of those techniques and tactics to play the game. We're going to focus a lot on conceptual teaching, which is a games approach. And if you remember my definition from leadership, it was talking about empowering the athlete to be part of leading the program. We want to do the same thing now in practice. We want to empower the athlete to practice tactical skills or decision making there. So we're focusing on the big picture, the whole concept of the movements all put together. That's the difference here. Technical skills themselves then is a specific procedure to move one's body to perform the task that needs to be accomplished. How can that get done? Let's take a simple soccer skill. Video I would have shown here, I'm not going to do it today, is really my daughter, who is 2, who was at a soccer session. And the instructor did a great job of really just getting them to understand the concept of soccer. You need to use your feet and not your hands and kick the ball. So when she does this, the whole group takes off. She doesn't initially, but then when she does, she's a blur. She's out of the picture. The fun thing is the instructor keeps it fun, and he focuses on one technique, and that's simply kicking the ball. No decisions being made. Kind of free play, though. It's kind of fun. Tactical skills, then, it is the decisions and the action of the players in the contest to gain an advantage over the opposing team or players. So we're not talking about strategy, that's the big plan. We're really talking about making quality decisions in your sport. So now we're going to take that simple soccer skill and make the decision: do we kick it straight? Do we dribble it? Do we pass it? And that's the tactical end of it. Concept teaching, again, is the power to form and understand big ideas. That's what we want to try to do now in our teaching with conceptual teaching, is we want to show them the big picture, make sure they understand what's around them, enable and empower them, and then the athlete really takes some ownership and becomes then a holistic approach. So a holistic approach is a way to help the athletes really learn the sport, focusing them to understand the game and what it's all about. Some real simple examples of why that's important is, again, coaching 9th graders. We get kids with all sorts of physical and maturity levels are different, but then also their experiences are different. Kids, some of them, it's their first time, some of them, they've been doing this since a young age. So it's as simple as learning some basic terminology, not assuming they know those things. Second thing then is helping them learn how to play the game. And then that's making those quality decisions. Again, some examples would be the quarterback position now has to start making decisions, and a lot of them, and doing it very quickly. So if you believe in tactical skill development and more of a games approach, which we'll get to, we're going to put that quarterback in a position on a regular basis to make decisions and practice those, so then when he's in live situations, he can have quality decisions. The next thing you want to do here is go ahead and enable and empower the athlete through that holistic approach. And a good example of this is why this is so important. If we took a quarterback now again, and we put him into a typical pass play where it's called 4 verticals. 4 of the receivers will just go right down the field, splitting it. The 5th receiver out of the backfield would run some type of route, a check down. So you've got 5 different receivers. The key here is research has shown that in order to have success and really start to get the whole concept, you need to have at least 24 successful rehearsals. So let's take this kind of formula. We've got, let's say the quarterback completes it 50% of the time. So let's just round up for math purposes. That's 25 out of 50 attempts. We've got 5 different receivers. That means before we even start to have any chance for success with this one play in the decision making for the quarterback, he's going to have to throw 250 times. So there gives you a better understanding of why you need to start doing this early and need to do it often in the tactical skill development. Again, we're empowering your athletes. The way you do that is through well-organized lesson plans and have a teaching progression. And then obviously, as you can see the importance here, you need to get repetitions. So a couple things when we break it down. Hold the big picture. They need to see it, they need to feel it, they need to experience it. So you need to really look at your design and how you teach it. Some examples would be when I was in college, when we installed things, we did it, and we do this with the 9th grade level, is we give all the different type of learners an opportunity to experience it the way they learn best. Whether it's walking through it, a tactile learning, whether it's seen as film, whether it's actually writing it up themselves. The next thing then is to break it down into its parts and start to do the details. Key here again is now we start to look at the techniques. We need to have some common communication, which means cue words so they clearly understand, we can be efficient. And then you need to have a start, action, and reaction. Okay? That would be the individual drills that you can do throughout practice. Again, if we went back to that soccer example I gave you, just simply working on the proper form of making a soccer kick. Then we're going to come back to the whole picture and to put in those game challenges where we combine the individual technique along with the big picture, how it connects to everyone. And then we start to have get those 24 rehearsals going. Good example here would be is we did a lot of what we called good versus good. We tried to match up the skill level of our athletes versus always having it broken down as a 1 or 2. We always did when we did team situations, we actually had game-like situations in practice, even if it was just 4 or 5 minutes. So now mentally they're going through it. And we wanted to make sure everybody was staying safe and healthy, that we did a rule where everyone would stay on their feet, not knocking people to the ground if you're in a contact type sport. So the games approach that we're trying to talk about here then really is the opposite of what is traditionally done. And remember I said once in class, you've got to be careful not to just coach the way you were coached. Not that that's bad, but we want to look at some new research and use that. Traditional approach is teaching it the way to play the game only after practicing these basic techniques. Okay, so not a lot of decision making, tactical skills. The games approach is going to combine as much as possible the opportunity to do free play or sandlot play or game play to experience these techniques within the decision making that needs to happen. So it's an emphasis on learning through the game, and you can see, if you remember from your own experiences, it's fun. That makes practice fun. If we break down some technical skills here, we'll go through some skills, some stages of learning, and then teaching them how to do that. I like this real simple. Coaching is teaching. We've talked about this a ton. I believe it. So what you're really trying to do is create some quality learning. And the way you know some really quality learnings occurred is through permanent improvement in the performance. So we need to monitor that. Some old research in the old learning was the mental blueprints type of thing was developed through just doing that repeated skill over and over. In football, you would hit a sled for blocking over and over. The problem is it's more complex than that when you start to involve an individual, because they're not going to react consistently. So you need to make as many different situations for them, realistic ones, so they can make quality decisions. So the new learning method is really kind of taking these technical skills and extracting key pieces of information from each performance to create these new rules to perform in the future. So you can see the importance now versus a sled that's going to move consistently to actually work and block against a live body that doesn't have a consistent reaction to the movements. The 4 types of information that we're trying to seek for the brain here is 1, the condition of the environment, okay, playing field, position of the opposing players, position of the athlete while you're performing this. Number 2, the demands of the movement being performed, so speed, direction, force. The consequences as they're perceived, meaning what are the senses during and after the movement? What do you feel? And then lastly, information on how well they perform the task. This is you as a coach giving them the feedback. Again, some definitions. What we're really trying to do here is you're teaching and trying to develop motor programs. And those are a complex set of rules that, when called into action, permit an athlete to produce a movement. It's only a generalized plan, but they need to make the actual correct movement. They have to add the details of these situations. So it's our responsibility really to develop some good motor programs for the athlete. Meaning we're trying to shape the practice activities to focus their attention. The 3 stages of learning then are the mental stage. We want to develop a good plan. So ways to do that is don't teach too much. Go from single to multiple skills. You want to really start slow here because it's easy to overload. The practice stage then, I always use a term called slow to fast, meaning we're going to start out very slow in the process, but as we get those details down and do it correctly, quality at the beginning, then we can increase the quantity and get the reps which are needed. Lastly then is the automatic stage, and once you get to that, the athlete isn't having to think, and it's really what we're talking about is flow, and as a coach, we're focusing on finer points, but we don't want to give too much feedback and really ruin any of that flow. So, a couple steps here in teaching technical skills. Introduce the skill. You want to get the team's attention. When you guys do your teaching for drills and skills here at Rec Hall, the first thing you have to do, and if you've ever worked with young kids in particular, you need to get their attention so that they're listening. You want to arrange them so that they can all hear you and see you, and you've got to speak in a way that they can do that. Second, lastly then, it's really helpful to name the technique or the drill itself, the technique you're trying to use, and that makes it very efficient as you come back to use those. Step 2. Step 2 is then demonstrating and explaining the technical skill. There's a lot of ways to do this. A simple way is to be able to walk through it and talk through it as you do it, but you can show video. You can ask an accomplished athlete to do it. You can relate the technique to previously learned techniques. This is called scaffolding or stacking of a technique, I like to talk. So we're going to learn this basic soccer kick that my daughter is learning. Then we're going to learn to be able to do it instead of a straight line, side to side, and then dribble it. So those are stacking of techniques. And make sure you check and ask the athletes if they really do understand. You need to ask questions. Step 3, have the athletes practice the skill, obviously, and you want to break those techniques into parts. Now what's neat here is that usually there's a couple different phases when you're doing technical skills: preparation phase, action phase, and a follow-through phase. A good example would be a quarterback throwing the ball. He's going to actually have a prep phase where he gets all his body in a position, then the action phase of actually throwing the football, and then follow-through allows that action to stay consistent and smooth. So you want to integrate all those parts into one whole piece and practice it in a natural progression eventually. Remember, tension the focus, practice the entire technique, but as you're practicing it, you've got 3 different phases. Really focus on only one phase when you start to give feedback. That's one of the big mistakes people make. Step 4, when you're correcting the errors, observe and evaluate the performance, but you want to give quality feedback. It doesn't have to be a lot. Make sure it's done when it needed to be, and never let a moment of success go by without some type of positive reinforcement. So, some better practice principles. 1, have your athletes practice the right technique. Remember, start slow, get it done quality first, then to quantity. Have the athletes practice technique in a game-like condition if you can. Keep the practices short and frequent. When you're doing new techniques, again, don't overload the circuits. Use your practice time efficiently. That's the reason we're designing and going through this. Make an optimum use of your facilities and equipment. Make do with what you got. The less toys you have, the less props you have, the easier it is to stay efficient. And then 6, make sure your athletes experience a reasonable amount of success. Set them up for success in practice. Don't overload, and make it fun. When we get into technical skills, you can see we're going to talk about a tactical triangle. It's a good way to analyze if you're getting what you need to out of the design. Read in a situation, some tactical knowledge, some decision making, and then teaching it. So first, tactic, it is a plan to gain an advantage. The games approach places great emphasis on this, and what we want to really is use this mental makeup to make some quality decisions. So think of your sport as a series of problems that need to be solved by you and your players, and the way you practice them is going to give you a better opportunity to do a good job in game situations. Example again with football. At the 9th grade level, we actually use a no-huddle system that's very popular at the college game right now. And the reason we do that is it forces them to process very quickly. So you can see with the whole part, whole method, we start out and our first week is very ugly, very bad. But there's a learning plateau that we break through, and it actually increases the amount of decision making and repetitions and processing we're doing. So slow start there, but then you can really take off. The tactical triangle has got reading, acquiring, and applying, and we'll go through those here then. So reading the situation, you want the athlete to recognize what the problems are, and then he can make good choices. The cognitive skills of the perception is really your attention, and we want to create some concentration. Remember, perception is really referring to a person's ability to recognize and interpret that sensory stimuli around them. So, attention to the important stimuli is the key here, and that's what we mean when we're concentrating, is be able to take all the other stimuli and get that out of the way so that we're focusing on the ones that really matter. So how do you improve some of that intention? Obviously minimize the distractions when it's practice, when you're first learning skills. When the players are playing, avoid distracting them with too much feedback. Again, that's that flow thing. Help your athletes actually identify themselves and be able to filter out things themselves, coach themselves up. Some pre-practice or pre-event routines are very helpful. We actually used to do this all through preseason camp when I was in college. As we went through a half, we actually broke up practice into 2 halves, and we actually took a halftime break so that we had a routine when we came back out for the second half. Instruct your players how to analyze their own play when there's a break in the action. Again, coaching themselves, and encourage them to keep focused on a situation. So that's your time allotments. Another rule of thumb I have is we do everything in 5-minute segments, which for football is pretty true to form. If you can focus for 5 minutes, then take a break and re-go. So we condition the athletes there both mentally and physically in practice. The athletes that have a lack of confidence or self-esteem are really vulnerable to distractions. So again, you want to try to create short moments of success, which is going to help them better in these situations. Some ways to create some tactical knowledge here. Is first, look at the rules, make sure you examine them and know them. Make sure you have the strategic and game plans in place. Again, organization. Know your different playing conditions, your opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Self-knowledge. I actually think it's important to scout yourself and know yourself really well, and then look at your tactical options. So, a couple of decision-making skills you need to work on is teach tactics in a whole, then break it into the parts. Like I said, you'll start out very slow, it'll look bad, but there's a point where it will take off, where you'll expand over the other traditional method. Have your players observe others to learn so they can make some decisions. You can do mental reps. Have your players observe themselves. A video is really powerful and pretty easy to do now at all levels. We can use it at the 9th grade level. You want to vary the practice, all right? Meaning you want to be able to have a good start with things, and then you're going to have a good finish. So you want to really simulate these real game conditions as much as possible in your practice setup. Control the feedback, paralysis by analysis. Don't give too much too often. And then lastly, ask questions. I'd encourage you after you do a drill to ask them and go kind of a review to see what they're learning, what they're hearing, what they're processing. Last year then we're going to look at a plan for teaching and how you put all this into action. And this is the last piece, and I'll give you the workshop, so hang in there. First off, you need to, step 1, identify the skills your athletes need. So look at a daily focus or emphasis, not just the skills, but what you want to accomplish that day. Take your technical and tactical preseason list and look at a progression. We used to do this at the college level, and we do it with 9th grade. What are the technical skills they need to learn? What are the tactical ones they need to learn before you have your first contest? And look at a progression there. You can do that scaffolding or stacking then of techniques. Look at physical and mental skills lists. Again, create some goals. The first part of doing quality control or evaluation is you've got to have a vision of what you want to actually accomplish. I'd encourage you to put keywords and names to everything. It just improves your communication. Again, don't assume young people know these certain terms. And then look at those ethics and character skill development. We talked about that. You can do that. You can build, you can help improve character or their ethics. An example is the quizzes that we're doing. I'm encouraged every week with the great honesty and the trust we get to develop through that. Step 2, know your athletes. How you want to evaluate them. It's easy to pick some essential skills and then safely perform them, maybe at the beginning of teaching. A pre-test is really good. Or you can do some easy games. Whatever works for you, but get some analysis on the front end. Remember, when you start to add what I call live bullets, meaning a game situation, the speed, the actual change in the variables, it's also going to change the way certain athletes react. So you could do that as evaluation. I used to go to basketball camps where they literally gave you a number and it was like a draft. We would go through and just play different groups for 2 hours, and they could come around and evaluate us in these live situations. Lastly, look at your technical skill assessment. You can look at doing a combine. That's kind of fun. I do that with camps, with skills. Or you could do a pre-post test. Those are different ways to do it. Step 3, analyze your situation. You need to do it, remember, for the portfolio, preseason, in season, and the off season or out of season. So the key here is to have some consistent evaluations. If you're doing a pre-test, you probably want to do that for each of the sections so it's consistent. You want to look at having some constant evaluation then, some quality control methods. If you look on Angel, there's a whole folder with quality controls. I'll give you examples of things I used to do at the college level and we still do at the 9th grade. When best to review, how much to review, and how much of change. The key here is to make sure you're focusing on your core concepts and what you want to hang your hat on, what you feel you need to be good at, and what the athletes really can understand, what sticks with them. The key at the end is if you do all this analysis up front, then you want to kind of stay the course because you know what's best for your athletes. Even though things change, you don't want to go too far off the path. Number 4, establish some priorities. You've got to prioritize these things. I've said this a million times. Please research your sport. Use some new information, like what we're trying to give you. Use some actual new scientific information. Adjust your plan, review, but you need to stick to the core. Remember, less is more. Don't overthink it. Don't be too cute. But be creative in your practice activities, but maybe in the routine versus what you do. And there are no magic plays or concepts. So again, it gets back to fundamentals and core concepts and sticking to your plan. Research it. Be organized. That's the biggest thing you can do. Your teaching style, look at selecting the methods of teaching either the games or traditional approach. There is a place for both. There is. But look at your leadership style, your philosophy, and it should connect. Do you want to be controlling or empowering? There's a time for both possibly, and it's kind of like the hybrid coach, the readiness of your team and the needs of them, those different stages of a team. Number 6, plan your practices. There's nothing worse, in my opinion, when I go do consulting and you've got coaches that have no practice plan, no preparation. They may have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, but it's easy to get off the path. This organization allows you to be efficient in what you're doing, and it creates priorities along with the plan. So be organized, have a documentation, do some real teaching, have a method for that, some real managing, some real leading. A great example of this is right here, Eddie Reese. He's the head coach at the University of Texas for the men's swim team. He's one of the best in the world. It's a 3.5-minute video on ESPN, but it goes through some of his philosophy on dealing with these elite athletes. And he's found a way to be very organized, but very simple and very sound and very successful. So what we're going to do to these last few workshops, there's a piece of cake here. And these are on Angel. You're going to design and actually drill a daily lesson plan. You'll use this one-page template that I'm going to show you. Those handouts are actually on Angel. If you go under templates, a folder there, you'll see the different ones, so you can print those out. And these are great to use in the portfolio. This gives you a very concrete example or illustration of your lesson plan and your style and your system. I'd encourage you to look at doing this where you use a games approach for this first one, use some concept teaching, and use both technical and tactical skill development. Again, if you do this now, you're going to have this prepared. This is a key component requirement in your final portfolio. Here's what it looks like. Here's one. You don't have to use this one. You can design or change it yourselves, but it's a good way to do a daily plan, and just set up and give me a concrete example in your portfolio. Okay? Secondly, you're going to have to do a seasonal practice plan overview, which is tough to do, but one way to do that is break it into a week-long situation. And here's a worksheet for you to do with this. You do the individual worksheet, and again, this is under templates here. Use the one page, and then you can use this again for your portfolio. What you're trying to do here in the steps is develop a week-long plan, Monday through Friday. For this one, I gave an example of first contest is on a Saturday after 2 weeks of a preseason practice. What you're going to do is identify that daily focus we talked about, what your emphasis is going to be, look at your approach, traditional or games or both, identify concrete ways how you're going to achieve those different approaches, and then look at the specific skills needed, both technical and tactical. Come up with some evaluation methods, what people don't often do, but use that for the week, and then look at your learning and teaching methods and explain why you're going to do that. Here's the template for that, which again is on Angel underneath the folder of templates. You could set this up, and again we'll give you a concrete example of a week in your seasonal plan that you can use for your final portfolio. So I hope this is giving you a good overview of teaching of sport. Again, you've got the 2 workshops, complete those, and you've got task 1 done.